Pretty much nothing I can do about that bright glare out of my window.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. We've still got people trying to get in, so maybe wait a few minutes.
Yep, that's fine. Yeah, I'm seeing the flood coming. We'll give people a couple more minutes maybe, and then I'll get rolling. Yeah, I think there's 2 workshops at a time.
Yeah, if you want to get going, I'll just continue to add people as they,
Cool. I actually went and found a drill and dealt with that window.
Oh, thank you. I thought it was mine. I muted myself, but it wasn't me.
No. Okay, so yeah, let me get started. So my name is Chris Blankenhorn. A little bit about me. I am from Springfield, Illinois. I'm a COVID laid off preschool teacher. I am the secretary of the Illinois Green Party and a former GPUS co-chair. I served from 2016 to 2018 as the national co-chair. I'm the vice chair of the Young Ecosocialists Education Committee, and I coordinated their education program for 2-3 years. And I am presently, most of my Green Party work is focused on the Howie Hawkins campaign, where I am the social media and tech director. But today, what we're going to talk about is ecosocialism. And so this is a workshop that I've done a number of times. I've done it, I did it last year at the A&M. I did it for the Illinois Green Party as part of our convention in 2019. I've been to Wisconsin talking about this topic. So, earlier before we started, I was talking about how I, with the Young Ecosocialists, was doing workshops on ecosocialism back in 2017 as well. So this has become one of the main things that I talk about in the party besides systems. I did a systems workshop yesterday. So for those of you that want to know more about ecosocialism, that workshop actually already happened. I believe it was yesterday. We had a kind of a deep dive on ecosocialism. I wasn't part of it, but it was a group of people that have also been talking about it for a long time. So, but what this workshop is focused on is making the case for an ecosocialist Green Party. Why should we own and claim this label? And why is it actually essential that we do so? So, to give a very, very quick, like literally 4 lines on ecosocialism, ecosocialism is reinventing society in a more ecological, and democratic and just way, socialism. So it's your traditional socialism values, worker ownership, internationalism, peace and democracy, fused with a ecological focus. And I think that's really important to understand, that when we're talking about eco-socialism, what we're talking about is democracy at every level we can. We're talking about political democracy, we're talking about community democracy, we're talking about workplace democracy, right? And when it comes to using the word socialism, that workplace democracy is really important. Workers need to own the means of production. Owners should not be siphoning off profits while workers are getting left behind, right? But there's more to socialism than that, right? A lot of times it just gets bogged down to that. But socialism is about community democracy as well. It's about political democracy. It's about peace and internationalism. If your socialism isn't internationalist, I don't know that you're practicing socialism, right? You're practicing a form of nationalism, which is a competitive system. And then an essential thing I think for us to understand when we talk about what does socialism mean is that it has to be based in working class organizing. The foundation for growth is working class independent organizing. If we're not organizing, we're not building, right? And we'll get into a little more later, talking about things like advocacy versus organizing. But first, we need to set up where we are, right? We need to set up what's going on in the world and how we got there. We're in dire, dire times. We've got a climate catastrophe on the horizon. We're on the verge of the 6th mass extinction. One of my favorite stories to tell is when I talk to my kids about the history of life and mass extinctions, and my students are 3 to 6 years old, is moss. Moss is the most dangerous thing this world has ever known. When moss came on Earth for the first time, it sucked every drop of carbon dioxide out of the air, turned the Earth into a giant ice ball, and killed 98% of life on Earth, excluding itself, because we still have moss. So it was resilient enough to survive. The problem here is moss didn't have a choice. Moss wasn't making a conscious decision to destroy the Earth. We are making a conscious decision to destroy the Earth, to destroy the life support system on which we depend, right? And I don't think we're going to be as lucky as moss. I don't think a human civilization is going to come out on the other end and be as dominant as it is with my moss-filled yard, right? So we're facing a climate catastrophe. We've got spiraling inequality, right? Wages have been stagnating for decades. Productivity skyrockets. Workers don't see a dime. It gets tighter and tighter and tighter. I want to say the numbers I've seen. Something like 60% of people don't have $1,000 to make. That means we're surviving. We're not living, and our society is not providing for us. That spiraling inequality doesn't just stay in the economic realm. We are in the middle of uprisings around the country for racial justice, right? And that's part of this. It's all connected in. And then to top it all off, which is expected in times of crisis, we have rising fascism at home and abroad, right? So with the ecological crisis, we're seeing the rise of eco-fascist movements, right? Using the economy or using the environmental crisis to justify racist, classist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist, oppressive measures, right? That's where we're at. And the reality of this isn't simply because, as mainstream political rhetoric would have you believe, that we're electing the wrong people. This is systemic. This is rooted in the function of the world we live in. And this world we live in is not a natural world. It's one that was constructed by men. It's reinforced by man-made systems. And I'm choosing that word really carefully. This world was made by men. And white men. There may have been women, people of color involved in upholding and creating these systems, but overwhelmingly, the world we live in was created for and by men, white men, right? And so it's really important that we understand that, because a man-made system can be brought down. The good news is a human-created world can be recreated by the people. And that's the really important part of a socialist movement. It has to be led by the people. So we live in a society that's dominated by capitalism. Our political system and our economic system, our social system, our culture is completely dominated by capitalism. Neoliberalism is the only allowable ideology in the political, and it's destroying people, right? It's destroying people's lives. It's leading us towards societal collapse. And this is as a result of years and years of the ratchet effect. If you don't know what the ratchet effect is basically is defined as the role of the Democratic Party. As the Republicans move the entire political system to the right, as they move the entire political system to the right, the Democrats hold their ground at their new further right position and say, this is the definition of far left in this country. 2 more years later, another national election, the Democrats have moved right and declared it the new left. Decades of constant moving, and the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, which are 2 sides of the same capitalist coin, are shifting the entire political culture or have shifted successfully the entire political culture of the United States. So this has left us with a political system that exists almost wholly right of center, right? Almost completely to the right of center. It's led us to a political system where old school liberals and capitalist social democrats are being seen as radicals. They're condemned as Marxists and communists, but they're capitalists. They're capitalists. When you look at Bernie's Green New Deal, it is almost completely based on, and Biden's even more, it's almost completely based on the idea that the public pays private industry and the private sector to make the changes needed. The private sector gets to benefit from it. The private sector gets funded, right? So this is not a radical thing. This is propping up capitalism, just as FDR did. But now our political system has shifted so much that the ACA, a program written by the Right-Wing Heritage Foundation, is decried as a socialist catastrophe. And that's the result of decades of this move, of this rightward motion, right? So we live in a society that's not representing the people. And as a youth, I'm gonna talk about the youth for a minute. I'm gonna focus on youth. For young people like me, and I'm at the old age of young, we've never known a government that wasn't wholly in the pockets of corporate interests. We've never known a time of peace. We've only known war. We've never seen an economy not dominated by austerity and neoliberalism. We've never known a government that worked for the people and not the 1%. We've never known an electoral system that had any resemblance to anything like a functioning democracy, right? So I'm 35. So for a huge, section of the American public, we've never known a government that worked for us. And it's brought us to this point right now. We're at the precipice of this multimodal catastrophe of the environment, of economic injustice, of the racial injustice, of rising right-wing violence and fascism, right? And we're at this point where we're well beyond the point where gradual change is a viable course. If we wanted to slowly change course, the time to do that was decades past, right? The working class can't wait for slow change. We're starving and we're dying from lack of health care. The environment, it can't wait. We have 10 years, based on scientists' warnings, 10 years to make major changes, or there may not be changes that we can make that can save us, right? That it won't be enough. The victims of US violence and oppression around the world and domestically can't wait, right? The people being bombed by our white supremacist foreign policy, they can't wait, and they don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat that's dropping the bombs. They're both dropping them. The victims of police violence can't wait for this slow change, right? We can't wait for this stuff. We had the chance for this. It was passed. And so as a member of a younger generation, we don't have time for bullshit about slow change and incrementalism. If you wanted slow change and incrementalism, if people wanted to avert this catastrophe without, some pain, without a major shift, that we should have been working on that a long time ago, and largely the American mainstream wasn't. So we need to take this drastic action. And to quote Kali Akuno, who was one of the readings that was included in the resources, it's ecosocialism or death, right? We are in the midst of a crisis. We have known about this coming crisis for decades. We've known about it. The Green Party has spent 36 years in this country screaming from the rooftops, sounding the alarm. You can say whether or not we were effective at how we sounded the alarm, but we've been on these issues for decades and decades and decades, right? And the people who founded this party were sounding the alarm before the party was born, right? Our bipartisan misleadership class has actively ignored, not only have they actively ignored this looming danger, they've instead accelerated us towards it, right? At best, we can hope for posturing. The Democratic Party always has and always will be a party for a business party, right? Ever since, they always have. When the flip happened after the Civil War, when the realignment happened, that was largely a fight over which party was the best business party, right? That was, it wasn't that all of a sudden the Republicans became racist. The Republicans and Democrats have always been racist. Their parties have always engaged and upheld white supremacy. That switch was about the Republican Party making itself an even more business party, a business-oriented party, a party of capital. And the key to understanding that a business party's actions is that they're controlled first and foremost by capital, by the wealthy, and by corporate interests. This is the fundamental drive for both of the mainstream parties. And personally, you can throw the libertarians in there too. That's another, we have 4 parties with ballot access in this country, and 3 of them are hard right capitalist parties. But so because of that focus, because of their dependence on money for capital, on the money of capital, both of these parties offer Wall Street a veto over even the most modest reforms. Howie often talks about Bill Clinton and how he was elected on, the absolute most modest economic reforms that you could put up. The most minimal changes that could be made, and they were vetoed. Wall Street said no, and it didn't happen. So even when some of our ideas seep into the mainstream, even when, or are outright stolen, right, by the Democratic Party, they are only adapted after being drastically cut down, drastically scaled back, drastically watered down and whitewashed, right? And if you can look at it across so many issues. One of my favorite is, Jill Stein was hugely attacked for advocating for student debt relief. John Oliver went on his popular half-hour-long show, however long it is, and just lambasted her. No one said a goddamn thing when Bernie Sanders brought up the same issue, right? The issue wasn't that, student debt relief being a bad idea. The issue was that it didn't come from within parties that were controlled by capital. It came from an independent outside source that was uncontrollable, right? And things like the ACA show the same thing. Obama came, and that's why I always tell people who talk about, well, we need to support Bernie to move the platform left. What does a platform mean? Obama ran on single payer. We don't have single payer. Platforms are words, and the Greens need to understand that too. Words ain't shit. Platforms are words, right? We have to go deeper than that. Another big issue is if you want to deal with the supposed spoiler effect, pass ranked choice voting. Period. Just do it. It's in your hands. Otherwise, you're creating the problem. So beyond this, near lack of, this complete lack of anti-capitalist politics in the U.S. mainstream, it's not just a void, it's a vacuum, right? And this is, it's sucking things into it. It's so needed in this country that dangerous people are able to take advantage of it, right? And this is evidence, that it's not just a lack of, but a vacuum, is evidenced by both the rise of Trump and Bernie, right? They're both utilizing this vacuum. So Bernie shocked the mainstream establishment by tapping in and filling that void. His political message spoke to working class and a working and academic class that was on fire, right? His campaign on economic issues spoke to people. He activated non-voters who were drawn in by his progressive policy and his outsider rhetoric, even if that stuff wasn't based in reality. Bernie's been in Congress for 30 years. He's been making a six-figure salary in Washington, D.C. for 30 years, right? He's not an outsider. He played a role, and that was to be the one that yelled on the floor and then voted for the bad bill, right? But he was able to fill this void. And the formula also worked for Trump, right? The same formula also worked for Trump. But he didn't orient towards the working class. He oriented towards white supremacy and platitudes, right? He created an illusion of populism when he is a fascist who has no interest in anything that has to do with the working class. So there's this void, and the shortcomings, there's this vacuum, and the shortcomings of Bernie and the progressives, and the inside reform tactics that they use, has placed the onus. The big problem with that is it places the onus of change on the Democratic Party, right? By doing so, Bernie and the Democratic Party have shepherded millions of people back to the stockyard to be slaughtered for profit, right? Like those before him, Bernie's fulfilled a necessary role. He's blunting and shifting. He's blunting and shifting people away from from breaking with the capitalist duopoly, right? He's spoiling any chance that there is of averting chaos, right? And in this age of chaos, we can't look to the same systems, institutions, and individuals that caused this crisis, right? The people who caused it can't save it. Those who dug the hole don't have the path out. And if they do, it's because it's a trap. It's because they dug the hole for a purpose, kind of like on defunding education, right? So while this rightward drive for destruction has led us to a very precarious situation, that widespread precarity also reveals that vacuum and the need for a truly independent power to arise, right? The mainstream sees the vacuum. Both parties are trying to fill it in their own way and siphon it. They're trying to weaken it because the vacuum is a threat. So where does that leave us? Crisis breeds opportunity, right? People are yearning for a new path, a truly alternative voice. They want it. Polling has shown for years the desire for third parties. People lie on polls, but the polling has shown it, right? And this is backed by low participation rates. But as Greens, we know non-voters aren't apathetic. Youth aren't apathetic. Communities of color, the working class, these are not apathetic graphics or demographics. These are alienated demographics. These are people who the system does not seek to represent. And almost none of those seeking to be part of the system have any interest in representing them. So they have rationally decided to not participate in their own destruction. Right? In 2012, I worked for a community organization as field director. We were part of a big campaign ran by SEIU International. And they were really focused on Romney and opposing Romney. And I had these throwdowns that eventually led me to resign my position with the national organizers, trying to explain to them the communities I was working in didn't give a fuck about Romney. There was no way in hell my constituents were going to vote for Romney. That wasn't on the table. What was absolutely on the table was they were going to stay home. They had a Democratic president, a Democratic senator, a Democratic House rep, a Democratic governor, a Democratic-led state senate and a state house, a Democratic mayor, a Democratic alderman. They don't have a Democrat and a Republican county board member, right? Those were the neighborhoods I was working. How has the Democratic Party worked out for them, right? And these people knew it. They were no longer willing to vote for people who were going to sell them down the river the second they got the chance. So there's a vacuum waiting to be filled. And we have to jump on this chance and be the truly independent working class party that people are demanding. The system's been rigged, and it's been rigged for a long time to make sure that this doesn't happen. But we can overcome it, not by playing the game better, right? Not by outsmarting them in their own system. We can play the game better by organizing with people, by going to where real power is, people, and organizing a mass working class party of the left. Another one of the resources that I provided in the links for the workshop was the Howie Hawkins campaign has put out a ebook. You can get it for free, and there's a PDF. I think there's a PDF I put in there, but it's called The Case for an Independent Left Party from the Bottom Up. It's a really short ebook broken into really small sections, and Howie does a great job of going through and tracing the past of independent politics and the successes and the failures of it, as well as, and makes the case for why we can't stop depending on them. We can't continue to depend on the Democratic Party to save us, right? So that leads us to the Green Party, right? Where people, Greens understand most of what I said, right? Greens understand how we got here, and that's why they're Greens. We're the only political party in the United States that's positioned to step into this role. We're the only party with large memberships and ballot lines from which we can challenge the status quo, from which we can provide leaders in our communities a true platform to fight for the working class, to fight for the needs of their community. And it's important for us to understand as we, look out and think about solutions here, the green values have always been inherently socialist. From democracy to social justice to peace to ecology, capitalism can't meet the standard of any of those 4 pillars, right? And we could go through the 10 key values, but that's kind of its. With the Youth Caucus, I spent 5 hours over 2 calls where we discussed the 10 key values and their relation to capitalism and how it doesn't work. So that's its own giant workshop of its own. But capitalism cannot abide by green values. They are socialist in nature, right? And it's not an aberration of modern capitalism. This isn't crony capitalism or corporate capitalism or whatever little whatever qualifier people want to add to the front of it that somehow makes it not capitalism's fault. Fuck that, it's capitalism. This is the way this is designed. It's the very nature of it. Private ownership, the basis of capitalism, is inherently anti-democratic, right? Boom, we're not mad. There went democracy as one of the pillars. When you center private ownership, it leads to a similarly anti-democratic electoral system that represents business interests and not people. Capitalism's demand that the many toil for the few is antithetical to social justice, and capitalism is amazing at weaponizing demographic differences, right? At putting us against each other, because capitalism demands that kind of competition between workers. It demands that kind of othering, so that we can place our focus somewhere besides the root causes, besides the systems of oppression, racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism. They're all tools, right, that the capitalist system uses. So they want social justice in terms of, capitalism abiding by green values. The need for ever expanding markets fuels imperialism. There are very few frontiers left, which means that now the endless wars are amplifying, the conflicts are amplifying, the meddling, the coups, the regime change pushes, they're amplifying as the power players in the world are pushed into deeper and deeper conflict to fuel the endless growth that's required by capitalism. And it consumes everyone and anything in their path, right? Clearly, capitalism does not work great for peace, right? It actually demands war to maintain those expanding markets. And those ever-expanding markets are also not ecologically sustainable, right? Capitalism's demand for endless growth can't be sustained on a planet with finite resources, right? And I'm not saying this isn't an overpopulation thing. Overpopulation is nonsense. We have mismanagement problems in this world, not resource. We have resource allocation problems in this world, right? So, and they're caused by this demand for ever-expanding growth. If capitalism has to keep growing, if profits have to keep growing, that means we're going to get squeezed more and more, and there's less left for the working class. There's less left for the masses of people, right? So the Green Party has always been a socialist party by its values, right? It's always been there, and socialists have been here since day one, right? I worked for the Howie Hawkins campaign. Howie is a lifelong socialist that was at the first meeting. He is a representative of the Clamshell Alliance, a direct action anti-nuclear organization, right? And that was why he was there. He was there as a hardcore socialist organizer. We've been here from the beginning. We've played huge roles from the national level down to our locals, right? And we've always been this intersectional socialist party. We just had to kind of grow. We had to go through growing pains. We have to find ourselves. And tomorrow we're going to nominate a party founder and the first openly socialist ticket in the history of the Green Party, right? We're on the path that we could surpass Debs's historic 1920 returns, where he got almost 1 million results. We're putting together the first real left unity ticket that U.S. history has seen in modern times, with the support of Socialist Party USA, with the support of Solidarity, working to bring in DSA, the Sunrise Movement, Socialist Alternative, and other small parties, right? So the Green Party has been living this for a long time, and it's time that we own our values, right? And I think it's also really important to understand that intersectionalism too. We've always been intersectional. We've always understood we have 4 key values, we have 4 pillars and 10 key values, because we understand that people's oppressions manifest in different ways, right? That people experience different intersections of oppression and that we need to acknowledge them, and we need to work on all of these different parts. So the question then, and also the Green Party is internationalist. We're already there, right? We're already an internationalist party. Now, I can say some things about some of these Green Parties, right? Don't got a lot of good things to say about the Green Party of Mexico, who was in coalition with a government that murdered students, right? That said, for as many reactionaries as we have in our global movement, we have some really, really, inspiring radical socialist parties as well. The Green Party is the controlling party in the city of Amsterdam. They have the largest city council. They're the largest party in the city council. The mayor is a Green. In 2018, I had a chance when I was in Amsterdam to meet with one of their city councilors, Aimeen Nadif, a young Black woman, and it was such an inspiring conversation. They're banning cars in the downtown, millions of new solar panels, hundreds of thousands of new social housing developments. They really can show you what happens when Greens have the power to make some decisions, right? Another one is Iceland, right? We hear a lot of things in the US media about Iceland. What they don't tell you is she's a member of the Green Left, right? Their prime minister that our progressive media loves to praise is a Green socialist, right? And there is a movement in Europe that is made up by the Nordic countries, Iceland and Denmark and They pull the Netherlands up in there, and that this green left bloc is opposing the liberal bloc that is led by the German Greens, right? And so this eco-socialist movement is happening internationally through the party. If you all haven't checked out the New Zealand Young Greens, some real radical people right there doing some real good work, right? And then you also, when you look at the Americas, yeah, I've got some bad things to say about some of the Green parties in America, but the Green Party US is part of the Sao Paulo Forum, which is a organization of socialist parties in the America, right? So we're building this international credential, and that we're building on the existing international credential. So this leaves us to, towards the last bit. How do we build the Green Party into a true eco-socialist alternative, right? Because the premise of this is that we're not yet, right? We aren't fully realizing our potential or our vision. For a long time, the Green Party has struggled to define itself. It's almost like it's a small in numbers big tent party. And that's led to that and conflict aversion and this belief that all views must be incorporated no matter their conflict, has led to a really muddled vision. An anything goes mentality has led to a camel of a party, right? A camel is a horse made by committee. And that is what we've created. So we have a party without a clear vision or a clear strategy. So if we're gonna fill this vacuum, if we're gonna rise to the occasion, there's some things we have to do, right? We have to be explicit with our policies, with our politics, if we're gonna fill this vacuum. If we are just 2 degrees to the left of the Democratic Party, why would anybody be inspired to enter our struggle? Because serious Greens activists can tell you, this is hard. We lose friends, we lose jobs, we struggle against slamming ourselves into a brick wall of repression that we face in this country. So if we don't offer something that's truly alternative, why? Why not just go with the Democratic Party and not have to deal with that struggle, right? And so the good thing is the working class doesn't need that fucking question. We're building a working class party because the working class needs change now. The working class gets it, right? So if we're going to inspire people, we must offer a clear alternative, not only in vision, but in our policy specifics. Greens often talk about policy in platitudes, in vague platitudes, but how is our vision different, right? We want universal health care. How is it different from the Democrats' plan? How is it different from Biden's plan? How is it different from Bernie's plan, right? And if it's not different, why are we not just supporting them? But the truth is, we don't know the answer to how ours is different most of the time, because we don't go through the policy work of crafting clear policy. One of the great things about Howie's campaign is when you say, how is the Green healthcare plan different from any of the Democratic healthcare plans? Because we put public ownership first and foremost. We create a national health service, not stopping just at Medicare for all, but a national health service that doesn't allow the pharmaceutical companies and the providers of healthcare to remain private and for-profit, right? When we lay out a clear vision, it gives something people that they can pick up, that they can talk to about their friends, and then they can organize around, right? And a big part of this, struggle is we're gonna have to really decide something. Are we an advocacy party or an organizing party, right? Because here's the thing, the current Green Party US strategic plan calls non-voters a threat. When I read that, my first question at a steering committee retreat was, where can I burn this document? Non-voters are our biggest opportunity. Our biggest opportunity. They're frankly our only opportunity, right? Because let's be honest about the Democratic Party. Much of the left flank of the Democratic Party that's going to leave has left already, or is floating in the non-voter pool, right? And the math on it is you can't steal a minority of a minority party and become a majority. The largest voting bloc in almost every election is non-voters. That's our future. If we don't think that's our future, we're not going to get this done, right? And a big part of why the Green Party's strategic plan thinks about this is because the Green Party's strategic plan fancies the party as an advocacy organization, as a white horse organization that speaks for those who need spoken for. People don't need spoken for. And let's be honest, we don't have the power to speak for anyone, even if we wanted to, right? People need to be empowered, not saved. And to do that, we have to become an organizing party. We have to show up. We have to be involved in our communities. Words ain't shit. I said it before, right? People think that people should support us just because of the platform. But the reality is, do we have the power to realize our platform? No. Those who do have power to realize their platform, do they realize it? And history says, looking at the Democratic and Republican parties, no, they lie to you when they knock on your doors, they give you platitudes, and then they go back to Washington and work for Wall Street, right? So coming to someone in a working class community, coming to a non-voter and saying, this is our platform, doesn't mean anything. Why should they trust you? So as organizers, we have to be on the ground. As organizers, we have to be putting our skin in the game. As organizers, we have to show up for battles that aren't ours. We have to build relationships, we have to build trust, and it's a long game process, right? If we go home after the election, we're gonna be starting from square one, right? So that means we have to be really strategic in our use of resources. We have to ask ourselves, should we be running this candidate? Does this candidate build the party, or are we running someone because we feel we need to run someone? Have we done the work? Do we have the connections throughout the community in the district to run a serious campaign? Or are we just putting ourselves on the ballot every few years and taking whatever will float in with no real ground game and no real growth? If we're running the same candidate for the same thing and we're not seeing growth, then we're not running the right candidate, or we're not running the right campaign. We're wasting our time, right? We're wasting our time. And that also comes to when we're in our meetings, when we're in our groups, when we're having our conversations. Are the people in the room the people that we want to be organizing? And often the answer to that question is no. Often in the Green Party, the people in the room are the same people who were in the room 30 years ago, and it hasn't grown, right? So we need to do some real, deep thinking about our local parties and how it works, right? We need to think about, who are we talking to? If we're not talking to the right people, how do we talk to the right people? If we don't know, we better start talking to some people who do, right? So I went longer than I thought, and I am happy to open up a little for questions. I never said I didn't think our party was a working class party. Adam, can you try to unmute yourself, Adam? It won't let me unmute. There you go.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know myself as a person with disabilities. My whole life, I've seen that side of what it's like to be like, I get government benefits, but yet, for example, if I go work somewhere, I lose the benefits that I get, and I'm basically not allowed to save money, or I'm not allowed to get ahead in life the way that the system is set up. And like, for example, when my mom was alive, I remember working for a place in Salt Lake City, Utah called Columbus Community Center. And pretty much, I before I started working, my rent portion that I paid was, you know, like 169 a month, and my food stamps at the time was 75 a month. But I was actually earning sub minimum wage. So basically, for every piece of work I put together, I was paid a penny for every piece of work I put together. But yet my rent went from 169 a month to 200 a month. My food stamps went from 75 a month, which is not enough to buy decent and good food, down to $10 a month. And vocational rehabilitation for the blind is a state agency that gets federal and state funds from the government. And in order for me to be able to work there, a person has to be, they have to be disabled to work there because it's a tax sheltered workshop. And pretty much, you know, if you earn money or you save money, then it ends up hurting you as an individual, whether you can or cannot work. And I personally believe that money is a form of slavery.
Yeah, and I mean, what you described is absolutely true, and how, you know, especially in my experience, especially in the disability community, I call him my radical grandpa. My radical grandfather died last week, unfortunately, but he and his wife really are who first taught me about disability rights activism, and the fact that it's one of the only organizing fronts where you're fighting on both sides. You're fighting both to deinstitutionalize people, but to also maintain, you know, proper care for those who might need it. And, you know, it'd be like a union organizing for capital as well. And so, yeah, it is that way because disability rights is one of those, you know, targets of capitalist othering. That they are, you know, capitalism finds the community easy to exploit, and it definitely does so in our laws. That mean exactly what you said about how people are paid and things like that. And then when I was a community organizer, I knew people who, you know, would get a job and then lose everything as punishment for getting that job because of their, you know, how they were rated, how they were viewed by the government. I thought people had hands up. Let me see. Margaret, can you unmute yourself? We're fighting over it. You're still muted, Margaret. I don't know. Nope.
Yes, just let me do it. Just
Yep.
don't help me. Don't help. Okay, thank you. So thanks, Chris, very much. I wanted to talk to you and ask you if you could explain, and if you're familiar with the concept called diversity of tactics. So we're going to use street activism and community building to help provide the energy for elected officials to have the power to compete against big moneyed interests. And I was wondering if you could maybe expound on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I see kind of two things that you're talking about there. Diversity of tactics, and that the constant argument in the Green Party of electoralism versus movements, right? I'll start with diversity of tactics. I am 100% a huge believer in diversity of tactics, not only within the party, but within the entirety of the left. There's a lot of people who talk about left unity, and we all need to unite. If every leftist organization in this country united, we'd be less than 2% of the vote. We'd be less than 2%. And most of us would likely be hobbling ourselves to conform to a larger vision that might have been good in its, you know, ideals, but in its realities and its material achievement wasn't really on the table, right? So in the present state of what we see now, I very much think that people and organizations should work on what they really are passionate about, right? I don't care if there's a million organizations doing work, so long as we act in solidarity with each other, and so long as we coordinate with each other, right? So long as it's not a turf war. Because here's the thing, none of us have figured it out. We would have more than 2% combined if one of us had figured it out, right? So we shouldn't, this isn't, I don't think, a fake it till you make it situation where we unify without figuring it out. I think we need to continue this diversity of tactics work. If PSL and /Answer, they want to go real hard on the movement stuff, absolutely. I have no interest in forcing them into some giant electoral left party, because you know what? That's going to limit what they do. Same with Solidarity. They've got the things that they do and they do them well. So let's all keep trying. Let's all keep making the changes that make sense to us. And when one of us figures something out, that's when we can start talking about unifying, streamlining our focus. For the movement versus electoralism, this is a decades-long fight in this party. And for me, the big problem of it is that it's often presented as an either or. And it must be both. It has to be both. If we are just running candidates, why would anyone support us if we're not showing up, if we're not fighting, if the only thing we're doing is putting people on the ballots? How can we grow? Because we're not building trust, we're not building relationships, we're not gaining access to new people, right? At the same time, movements that can't transition into power often find themselves absorbed or destroyed by mainstream politics, right? You can list all of these different, there's a reason the Democratic Party is called the graveyard of movements, right? And so what the Green Party has to realize is we don't need to become the Democratic Party of the left that absorbs and eats everything, right? That comes through us, that just sucks it in and makes it takes what we want from it, discards the rest, and the movement's dead. We need to be building these relationships so that when a leader in these movements wants to run for office, they can come to us, right? And that's what happened in my local community. Because the Illinois Green Party won a lawsuit, we have some of the most repressive ballot access laws in the country. For me to run for US Congress in my district as a Republican, I would need to collect 788 signatures. As a Democrat, I would need to collect 748 signatures. As a Green, I would need to collect 15,000 signatures in 90 days. So double that to 30 in 90 days from one rural congressional district. It's not on the table. So we won a lawsuit, the numbers were reduced, and one of the leaders of our local Black Lives Matter protests that have been going on, that I've been involved with since the Occupy movement, approached the Green Party and is running a really impressive state house campaign, right? If I wasn't engaging with the movement and had that relationship with him, he would have just ran for something as a Democrat. And the Democrats right now are offering him, drop out, we'll run you for county board, right? The same thing's happening to our candidates in Chicago. The Democrats are coming to them and saying, what do you want to run for? We'll put you up. So I think it's really important that the Green Party stops this either or fight and understands that successful campaigns are linked to our relationships in our communities and our relationships with movements. And movements transitioning from power or from protest into power require a platform. They require a party, right? And it needs to be independent of the Democrats and the Republicans, because the Democrats and the Republicans are leading us straight off the cliff. The difference is one of them is going to go off at 55, one of them is going to go off at 60, and no one's going to try to pull the brakes. Let's see. I can see AJ, so I'll go ahead and unmute yourself.
So the spirit of maybe statistic is speaking to me, and so you and I have talked about a lot about tactics, and rightfully so, and we should be. But what about program? What can our party do to generate some sort of program that's saying, here's a path that we can do as the eco-socialists in this party? I'm not saying you may have that response, but if you do, please let us know. But what kind of program do you envision that an eco-socialist political party would be?
So this is the point where I would point to Howie's platform, and especially Howie's Eco-Socialist Green New Deal. But, you know, a lot of it in terms of platform, you know, we have to be, and this goes, you know, and that's a federal platform, right? That's a federal platform for a third-party presidential candidate. But we have to be kind of looking and asking ourselves the same questions down at the local level. What really, so if you need to, you know, put together your platform, what's impacting people in your neighborhood needs to be what guides your in your community, in your district, needs to be what guides your platform building. National platform building is a little different, but there's some key things in there, right? And the other thing I think it's important to do is understand the district that you're running for and what its power is, right? If you are really into anti-war stuff, running for state house might not be the best thing for you because it's not a platform to talk about your issue, right? But we need to start making these connections through, right? So how do we get a guaranteed income? How do we get a minimum wage increase? How do we actually realize housing for all, right? And some of these things can be solved locally. Some of them can be solved federally. One of the important things to understand, especially in the current environment where there's big calls for things like defund the police and reinvest in our communities, which is an absolutely good, you know, platform. It's a good proposal. Our police forces are way, way, way overfunded. They pick up most of the city budget in most cities. But here's the problem with that. If we gutted every single police department down to nothing in the country, we still couldn't cover the social programs that we need to cover, right? It's not enough money to pay for housing for all for everyone. It's not enough money for an income guarantee. So we do need to have these federal level programs. So yeah, I mean, but the core thing when you're building your platform has to always be the people in your district first. What are their needs? How are they suffering? And what are real practical ways to alleviate them, right? We always, there's great moral justification for a lot of the things that we advocate for, but moral justification doesn't actually guarantee the political reality, right? And we often stop there. We need Medicare for all because healthcare is a human right, end of story. We need to build the political movement, or harness it in this case, because it's already out there, to really jump on it and get going. Is that kind of an answer? Let's see. I've got Rick from San Diego. You are unmuted.
Oh, thank you. So, and thank you for your presentation. This is a problem that we've faced for 2 centuries now. Going back to Fourier, going back to Owen, to the early parts of the 19th century, we probably won't settle it today. But I think you gave us a useful framework. I want to just make a comment on what I think is one of the most important questions that you raised and that we need to think about, and that's the problem of organization. Because if you take, for example, the current police murder, Lives Matter, I think what we're seeing is that to a large extent, these organizations, even though these movements, even though they develop spontaneously, take an organizational form. And if somebody doesn't come in with a particular set of views, they are already being taken over by the NGOs, by the Democratic Party, by the people who have the money, the foundations to do this kind of thing. So we need to think about how we can build an organization that can actually effectively compete with those of the ruling class. And you talked about the question of bottom up and top down, or at least I'm inferring that from what you were saying. And I think that that's not an either or. What we need to be able to do is both of those things at the same time. And I've for a long time believed in the desirability of a broad left party, that the Green Party can be part of founding or nucleating or even grow into, although I'm not sure how likely that is. There are examples of that with Green parties, like you mentioned, the Netherlands. Croatia is another example. I'm sure there are others that I'm unfamiliar with. And some that have come from outside the Green Party, like Syriza in Greece and the PT in Brazil. These all have problems. So if we want to do that, if we want to go down that path, we really need to think about what those problems are. But just to finish up briefly, I mean, one of the things that I find very inspiring about Howie's campaign is the Left Unity hashtag, and actually working with Angela. And I think we should be looking for ways to work more closely with the Socialist Party USA and with other groups. In California, for example, we basically have an agreement with the Peace and Freedom Party where we cross-endorse each other's candidates for reasons that I don't have time to go into. I don't think we can develop a very close relationship with Peace and Freedom, but I think that that's a good way in which we should be moving. And especially, let me just stop there. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and absolutely, you're right. You're absolutely right in the both on top down and bottom up, right? I am very much a Marxist in my thought process, and that leads me to believe that there needs to be some push, some centralization behind the major types of shift in political culture that we need in our party. I don't know exactly how that pans out, but we do need something. And yeah, a big thing with organization too. So Jill's youth director in 2016 is a man named James Andrews. And I spent years working with James in the Youth Caucus as an advisor, and James has spent decades studying swarm biology and mass movements and things like that. And one thing that James really taught me is that the true level of democracy, or how radical or how alternatively organized an organization is, has to do with the structure and not the rhetoric, right? You can talk about being the most socialist, the most democratic, and have nothing democratic about your processes, right? The posturing doesn't matter. And one of the big warnings that James was always giving was, don't try to replicate the structures of the mainstream politicians, of the mainstream political actors, because that's going to lock us in to some realities of that structure that's going to be limiting and things like that. So the Green Party, I mean, like I said, it's growing pains, and we're learning, and we're going to have to figure this thing out, and we're going to have, there's a lot of great models that we can look at. You were talking about coalitions, like the Green Party in Denmark is in the furthest left coalition in their parliament. They're part of the red-green movement, basically. But man, we operate in this very unique situation. We are a continental nation of hundreds of millions of people with one of the least democratic political systems, out there. When Maine and I talked in Amsterdam, it really dawned on both of us the differences in organizing. She can be anywhere in her country in 2 hours on mass transit. I can't even get into the nearest city in that time. right? Like organizing the Greens in the United States into a real power. There's a lot of great things that we can take, that we can build from and learn from, but there's also a lot of unknown. And that's one thing that we have to stop being scared of on the left. People want this perfect vision, right? And it's impossible to give. It's a setup. There's no way to say this is how things are going to work. It's going to be step by step. There's going to be fallbacks. There's going to be steps forward. There's going to be blunders. Things that worked 50 or 100 years ago won't work now, and things that didn't work 100 years ago might work now, right? And so we really need to be honest about the unknown, right? And we need to sell it in a way. The world right now has a 100% guarantee of collapse, right? The first part of this call, all that bad shit that got laid out, that's going to happen. It's that die is cast unless something changes, right? So we have a 100% chance of failure. And people will ask a question to a socialist and respond to and go back to the response with, well, what if it doesn't work? Well, what if it does? Because right now, socialism has a better chance than capitalism working in the long run. There's a 100% chance of failure on one. If it's 95% chance of failure on socialism, I'll take that 5% because it's better than 0, right? But we have to, as the left, find a way to be honest about this growing, about the precarity of it and the unknown, because that's the thing. Building something new is risky. And unfortunately, Americans are risk averse because of comfort in most cases. See, I've got Sheldon. You're unmuted.
Okay, actually it's Marianne Schaefer, but we're on the same computer. My concern is, are we losing focus? I mean, when I envision the Green Party, I think, okay, we've got to think environment or ecosystem first, and then branch out from that and say, okay, how do these other things tie into that? So for example, the eco-socialism is very good. The beginning thing we had yesterday.
You may have to unmute yourself, even though you're unmuted.
Okay, I am unmuted.
Yeah, okay, good.
How can we, how can we relate? How can we start out in the ecosystem and the ecological concerns and branch out to these other things? And the explanation of eco-socialism yesterday did a wonderful job of that. It pointed out how you cannot be ecological and allow capitalists to commandeer all the natural resources and still preserve the ecology. And I think Greta Thunberg did a very good thing. She's always sounding like she's about the ecosystem, but she made this one really powerful, absurdity confronting statement when she said, you cannot keep going with this capitalist system with this pie in the sky notion that you can always increase profits and grow indefinitely. And I thought that was a beautiful statement. It showed how, you could get the political movement that you wanted or refer to it and still be referring back to the ecosystem. And almost everything, we need to keep doing that. We need to keep referring back to the ecology that is our motivation, our vision. And it goes into all of these other things. It goes into like what you were saying about the pharma. Big pharma is destroying the ecology. So we have that reason, as well as the fact that big pharma is hurting people who need the medicines, who deserve the medicines, and who don't deserve to have these highly capitalistic companies claiming that, well, they have the right to take all kinds of money because they're the ones, after all, that are developing these things, when they're not, A, and B, they're raping the environment to get the stuff to do it, which they wouldn't have to do if things weren't in this capitalistic focus. And I think we need to do that with everything. Keep referring back to the environment and how the environment demands that we do this or that. You were saying you want a lot of different movements and a lot of different viewpoints. And if you keep referring back to the environment, you can do that. For example, I'm pro-life. You don't have to have a pro-abortion comment in there. You can allow for a pro-life person who's interested in the environment, who sees the value of socialism, who sees the value of having a medical plan that encompasses everybody without bankrupting people. So my question is, how can we keep promoting the environment, which is in our name? But sometimes when I go to certain of the movements or something, it's like, so where's the environment in what you're saying? How can we get back that vision and focus on the environment?
So I actually don't think the party has really ever had vision and focus.
Okay, that's why I can't find it.
You know, and so when you keep talking about coming back, you know, I personally think that where we should be coming back to is capitalism, and the environment is part of that. But what, you know, when you're talking about coming back, what it makes me think of is an organization called ACT UP, which is an anti-AIDS organization. And ACT UP was amazing at a lot of things, but one thing they were really amazing at was making the connection. Everything they did pulled back. So, you know, on Monday, maybe they're at Wall Street and they're protesting, you know, how the companies are causing and how Wall Street is causing the AIDS crisis. And they make that line direct. And then a couple days later, they're outside of a hospital and they're talking about how the medical system draw the line directly back. And then a few days later, they're somewhere else and they draw the line directly back.
That's what I'm looking for.
And they were really, really good at it. It was about framing, and it was about having a clear vision of what their central issue is. So whether our central issue is capitalism or environmentalism or systemic racism or any of those things, and we should be doing this anytime we talk about things, not only when they're central, you know what I mean? But when we're talking about an issue, we should always, when we start branching out, how exactly are we drawing that line? How are we making the connection for people to see the intersectionality of this crisis? So yeah, when you talk about coming back, anytime I talk about that, it always makes me think of ACT UP and just how absolutely amazing they were at making those lines.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, the Black Lives Matter thing. I mean, there's nothing that environmental degradation affects more than poor people. I mean, they always put these polluters in the poor sections of town. The people that benefit from these are never the poor people. So we can always make that connection from wherever we are back to the environment. And being that that's in our name, I'd like to see that done a little more, don't you?
I really think that it's not the end of the line, for the environment. But that said, like we're talking about big issues here. So I think I've got time for one more question. If anybody's got one, I can't really see everybody. If people are there. Sorry, I'm trying to cycle through. Ellie?
Yes, thank you.
You're unmuted.
Good. Have you turned me on? And can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Nope, no, I can't hear you.
By doing factory work mainly. One of the things that I can report from having made observations elsewhere is that the level of class consciousness in the United States, while it varies from state to state and from environment to environment, it's not the same thing in Los Angeles as it is in, let's say, Boston. And there tends to be a denial of the importance of class consciousness. And I found this nowhere as strong as in the unions. I've been a member of many unions. I started out at the age of, before I turned 18, I was a member of the ILGWU, working in a leather belt factory in Philadelphia. At other times, I've worked in aircraft plants, mainly machine shops, job shops all over the country. I have rarely come across workers in this country who say, I am working class. In London and Teddington, there's a whole working class means you do this and you don't do that. So what reliance can you place on class consciousness as a factor in social change if you're dealing with the United States? I know the work of Joel Covell. I know the work of other people. I read Monthly Review. I know all about ecosocialism, but I don't understand the vision of social class that is promulgated because I don't come in contact with it no matter where I work or did work. I'm now 90, I'm past 95. Yeah, I've lived a long life. I've seen a great deal. And I'm looking for the American working class. It seems to have lessened. There was much more class consciousness in this country in New England 80 years ago than 50 years ago, and there's been a continuous diminution. The main aspiration of the United Auto Workers was to enter the middle class. I'm waiting for your response.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I would absolutely agree. And with what you just said about the auto workers is a good place to start. And I've got a third of the observation time as you, less if you discount when I was a child. But in my experience, one of the things that hurts that is that the U.S. lost the traditional vanguard of the working class, the unions. Our unions have become, not all, but many of our unions have become collaborationist unions. They work more, on behalf of capital. They work to make deals with the management. They forgot why they existed in the first place. And I will say too, when I've been in almost every workplace I've ever worked in, there was a class consciousness without recognizing it. The workers understood they were getting screwed. The workers understood the power structure. The workers were exhausted and overworked, and that makes resistance harder. But they did get it, but there's a sense of hopelessness about what can they do. And I think part of that is, like I said, our modern corporate unions have largely abdicated that role. But I can say I'm in a workplace that is very frustrating and infuriating a lot of the time, and it is non-union. And that is because of difficulty getting my coworkers who do agree with me on our need to stand up, to actually stand up. And I think a lot of it also comes from There is a thing in white middle class culture where we are very much conflict adverse. And most working class folks think of themselves as middle class and seem to have adopted that. So there's a lot of like, but I can't rise up against my boss. And yeah, the problem you identify is absolutely real, and I'm not quite sure how we overcome it, but I do think that subconsciously at an experiential level, workers do get it. And I do also think that one of the problems we have is that we don't value experiential level. We don't value the experiences that people have and place them with the same level of respect as an academics, as Paul Krugman or Richard Wolff speaking on it. When I was community organizing, I was on the east side of my town and I'm knocking doors and I'm supposed to spend 2 minutes a door. Just get the signature and go. That's what we're doing. And I knocked on this door. I ended up talking to this young man for half an hour to an hour, way longer than I was supposed to. And at the top of his card, I wrote Foucault and doesn't know it. Because this 20-something young black man who'd never sat in the classes that I had on Foucault was describing Foucault's theories experientially in a way that was more powerful than Foucault. And I think that's something that a problem we have in our society is, when someone says, this is what I experienced, we want facts and stats as though their real life experience wasn't factual. But yeah, it's definitely something we're going to have to figure out as we grow. How do we awaken the sleeping giant of working class consciousness in the nation if it's there? So I think that's about my time. Thank you very much, everybody. I was really happy that we could have this discussion. And Adam, you got something real quick? Because someone else is coming.
Yep. Yeah, I was just going to say one thing I believe would solve the money thing is to completely rip the entire monetary system down the way that it's created, the way that money is allowed to be printed. The whole thing needs to be ripped down to nothing and rebuilt up. That's one thing I believe will solve a lot of that as well.
Yep. And that's when I talked about the time for slow change. This is the kind of place we've reached, right? Where we have to take these drastic actions that will be chaotic and painful for some. So it's unfortunate that we've reached that stage, but we really need to recognize that that's where we're at. That if we don't move now, if we don't make waves, if we don't get it done, it might not ever get done. So thank you, everybody. I will see everyone later. It's weird to not do these in person. It's weird to not spend the next 2 hours standing outside in the hall talking to people, or in the case of this workshop last year, it's weird to not have to go running from the room because of a live shooter or an armed person on campus. So thank you everyone for coming, and I am not sure who's next.
So I was so distracted from the last meeting, I forgot to record until the middle. I got part of it. Awesome. One of us had our act together. It's a workshop on media, but I think I'm going to shut this down because I can't get people in the waiting room and I'm not seeing anybody's hands. I'm not hearing people that are talking, so I'm just going to reset. Okay. So if anybody wants to attend the media workshop, that'll be at 4 o'clock, but you'll have to come back on.
Thank you, everybody.